Hello, everyone. My name is Ian Garcia. This is Devotional Criticism, and welcome back to the New Movie Diary. This is a cinema criticism series in which I review recent, new, and up and coming film releases and attempt to give you the straight facts about them, in my humble opinion. And last weekend, I went to see The Death of Robin Hood, which stars Hugh Jackman as the legendary outlaw hero of English folklore, except that The Death of Robin Hood reimagines this icon of medieval myth at the edge of life's end, an aged vagabond, thief, and murderer whose fame and infamy as an avenger for the poor is strictly a self-flattering lie that Robin has weaved over the course of his life to both mystify clueless peasants and possibly to recruit pliant followers such as his most famous sidekick, Little John. Little John is himself portrayed in The Death of Robin Hood by Bill Skarsgård as a mature but certainly much younger compatriot to Robin, alluding to more blood-quickening implications about Robin's own psychopathic cynicism and ruthlessness that don't get put into words until the very end of the movie, so keep a lookout for that if you must. Skarsgård interprets Little John as basically a brute simpleton who, having long since made his own way as an outlaw, comes upon Robin in the northern Irish mountains, asking assistance. Having married and fathered a young daughter, Little John now dreams of a peaceful, settled life, a small parcel of land, cottage, and farm all of his own. Problem is that he only gets those things by murdering someone else and taking their land, only for the family of said victim to rout him out and take his wife and daughter hostage. Little John wants Robin to have one last adventure with him, but don't be too hasty if you think you can see where this is all going, because writer-director Michael Sarnowski has more on his mind than a medieval blood feud. Michael Sarnowski made a big splash back in 2021 with Pig, a similar kind of odyssey and character study of a man on the margins of the civilized world, in that case Nicolas Cage as a mountain recluse who has to uncover the skeletons of his past in order to save his favored truffle pig. And while I'm more than aware that Pig has a die-hard cohort of fans out there that has made them eager to see Sarnowski finally making his return to more offbeat kind of independent cinema following his sojourn into major Hollywood franchises with a spin-off prequel to A Quiet Place, I was never too fond of Pig, though I'll certainly give Sarnowski credit in that, while it was pretty slickly advertised as being some kind of classic crazy Cage vehicle and even lower budget ripoff of John Wick than anything, the movie itself really wasn't something that leaned too hard into that trend of the middle-brow art house genre movie crossover. It may have certainly shared a quality or two with those John Wick films, its deliberately archetypal protagonist in a classic Western outlaw mode, its heightened use of urban setting, taking us through different levels of strange and occult scenarios carved out of mundane life, from underground bum fights to hot cuisine restaurants where the staff act like literal cult members. But the most refreshing aspects of Pig were that it was kind of a bait and switch. Sarnowski takes advantage of our assumptions based on neo-noir formula and a prejudice to the idea of Cage being a stunt-casted, outlandish character type, and even primes us for some bloody payoff, only to confirm that Pig is really more of a melancholy urban fantasy. It's not really an action flick or a revenge thriller. The journey through these various familiar but still strangely disconnected set pieces is the point. It's a mood piece. The same can very much be said for The Death of Robin Hood, which is all but similarly being deceptively pitched by distributor A24 as not an off-brand John Wick, but an off-brand Northman, a Robert Eggers adjacent revisionist take on medieval period drama. But where Sarnowski goes with this story, which will soon embroil not only Little John's daughter Margaret, played by Faith Delaney, but also Jodie Comer as Sister Brigid, the prioress of a utopian-seeming nunnery, and Murray Bartlett as a masked leper who immediately sights out Robin's identity, the narrative of The Death of Robin Hood becomes a similarly moody baiting and switching of our expectations based on formula, with Sarnowski writing and directing this as primarily an archetypal character piece, an observation of this revisionist take on Robin Hood as an old, selfish, ruthless pseudo-barbarian of the Middle Ages whose deliberation to survive by any means also means that he is tortured by his own identity and existence. The trail of every life he's taken and every false story that he's weaved about his outlaw heroism, leading to a man who yearns for death but cannot allow himself, or even really within the kind of super mythic structure or portent of the mood, the atmosphere of the film, how much of it is really the Robin Hood of myth and not a historical Robin Hood, if you could imagine it. How much it almost seems like he can't die, like the universe won't allow him to die, at least in a way that is consistent with his worldview. On the one hand, the death of Robin Hood serves as a fairly interesting example of interpreting a revisionist take on one stream of Western popular culture, medieval legend and heroic period pieces, through a lens that inevitably betrays more familiarity with another kind of historical revisionist piece, that being the revisionist Western film. Jackson's Robin Hood could very well be the kindred spirit of any number of outlaw folk heroes from U.S. modern history, with echoes of the man who shot Liberty Valance and Robin's own contemporaneous agony, as a man who not only reckons with the truth of his monstrosity every day, but is doomed to hear all the time about how beloved he is, what a hero he's made out to be. On the other hand, Sarnowski clearly hasn't neglected a revisioning of the Middle Ages entirely. Indeed, as the narrative goes on, one could even say that the ironies of where this last adventure of Robin Hood leads could very well fit with the allegorical conventions of medieval literature. A vagabond hounded by death into the places that Robin ends up going doesn't even feel that far out of step with the sort of stuff that you might find in the Decameron or the Canterbury Tales. But as with Sarnowski's feature debut, the problem I find with the death of Robin Hood is that even for what is primarily a mood piece, it's rather stiflingly one note. Though certainly not short on outbursts and ordeals of gruesome violence, the atmosphere of the death of Robin Hood becomes suffocated by a sort of drifting melancholy, which becomes something of a tall order to take seriously, because there is this inherent dissonance to the attempt to re-envision Western canon through a prism of cruelty and barbarism and cycles of violence, as opposed to some romantic heroism or great arc of civilized history. And then the presentation of Robin Hood himself as a character, someone who, though he might no longer be a noble outlaw, is still so archetypal as an outlaw to the opposite extreme, the barbarian extreme, that rather than coming off as stark or horrifying, it simply comes off as being overcompensatingly absurd. Besides a rather mediocre performance on the part of Jackman himself, the Robin Hood here is too obviously a creature born of a modern writer just tacking to an oppositional interpretation of the Robin Hood legends, rather than really deconstructing them, attempting to pick apart the layers of myth in order to find space for the banal, space for the credible in rendering Robin Hood as a character, and not just the opposite extreme outlaw archetype. It's Robin Hood. His iconic status is going to kill the venture. This isn't an interesting character study as a barbarian outlaw, any more than it is as a green-tided arrow-shooting romantic. Sarnowski treats this mediocre character with such oppressive seriousness, but it's never really far from your mind that this is all just a little silly. Like, ooh, what if you did Dark Robin Hood? It's like the equivalent of doing Dark Winnie the Pooh or Dark Steamboat Willie. Nobody has considered Robin Hood to be an iconic standard bearer of heroism in Western popular culture in nearly half a century. Besides a Disney animated musical from the early 70s, a Kevin Costner star vehicle that isn't remembered nearly as much as the Mel Brooks parody of it, they even tried giving our boy the forced cinematic universe treatment in 2018. You remember that shit? But at the very least, anyone who actually sees the 2018 Robin Hood will be able to tell you that, while it's structurally impossible to view it as a good movie, It is at least a fun mess. It's Robin Hood, but as a mockbuster, intentionally anachronistic period fantasy. It had like Robin Hood being a returning veteran of the Crusades who gets trained by Jamie Foxx as a Little John, but where he's like an Arab Muslim warrior who teaches Robin how to do sick martial arts archery and parkour so that he can attack the evil monarchy and church that's maintaining the Crusades as a means of authoritarian control, in this very on-the-nose satire of the post 9/11 era and the US wars in the Middle East. I gotta go watch that again. That movie is so gloriously, shamelessly stupid. But for every Hollywood liberal who's just a little too high on his own supply, who is capable of making something so gloriously and shamelessly stupid, there's inevitably going to be, as it turns out, rather by-the-numbers indie writer-directors like Sarnowski, who spend a lot of time soaking us in the disconnected, melancholy mood of something that, at its foundation, what if Robin Hood was a bad guy? My friend, what if Robin Hood was interesting? Overall, I think it's fine. I'm giving it a 3 out of 5. Anyway, I'm getting out of here. Thank you so much for sticking through this whole video, and please don't be a stranger to shouting out in the comments, what did I get right? What did I get wrong? Otherwise, please share, like, subscribe, bell, yada yada. My name is Ian Garcia. This is Devotional Criticism, and this was the New Movie Diary. I'm going to catch you guys next time.